right, welcome back to the Hall Pass podcast, everyone. Today we have another special episode for you. Thank you to the Admission Masters for sponsoring us. I'm your host, Jenny Wheatley, and I have Richard and Jay here with me today. We're going to do something super special today. We're going to try to record our Hall Pass podcast here on recording and we're going to try to air it on YouTube, so you should be able to see our faces and hear what we have to say. So again, we're very excited to bring the June updates episode to you guys today. I feel like everything is really changing with the coronavirus. Things are always changing, like even week by week, sometimes even day by day. And so we wanted to provide you guys with some really new updates that's kind of happening throughout the country, actually, and give you guys our advice, and we'll start from there. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with the College Board update. So if you guys haven't heard, the College Board has asked colleges and universities to provide flexibility during upcoming admission season. So what they've asked are three things. The first is they've asked colleges to accept SAT scores as late as possible in their process. So they basically want, colleges to extend score deadlines, especially for early action and early decision applicants, which of course you guys know those are due November 1st. And so they're asking, hey, can you allow students to take the test in November, possibly even December, so that they can at least have the time to send their scores. So that's the first thing that the College Board has asked. The second thing is they wanted colleges to equally consider students for admission who are unable to take the SAT due to COVID-19. So basically, do not penalize students because they can't take the SAT. So I don't know if you guys know, but the College Board website has crashed multiple times at this point, and it's been really tough, I think, for students to register for their exams and their tests. And so, College Board is asking, hey, please do not make it harder for students to get accepted if they did not have the chance to take the SAT. And then the last thing College Board has requested is to recognize that students who do submit their SAT scores may not have been able to take the test more than once. So what does this mean? If your school is still going to require SATs even through this pandemic, then please recognize that they only had one time that they could be taking this test. They could not take this test multiple times. So even if they had not the best score, please excuse that because they're only able to take it once. So those are the three things that College Board had asked for colleges. What do you guys think about this, Jay and Richard? I mean, what have you guys been kind of advising students, and what have you kind of been telling students about, these changes of what's happening with the test scores or the test?
Yeah, so I think what I've been telling a lot of my students is, even though a lot of colleges are going test optional, that doesn't mean that you don't have to take the test at this point. We still want you to try to show to colleges your proficiency in these standardized tests, especially because they're giving you the option to be submitting these scores. At the end of the day, I do think that it's going to be less important than it has been in the past. But at the same time, because they can be considered, if you can still study for the SAT this summer, it's probably beneficial for you to give it a shot and then maybe try during the next attempt, which I think is in August.
I think there's if I put it to questions that I have, I think it comes down to the age of the student I'm dealing with. If they're in probably like 9th or 10th grade, that becomes more of a question for me as to whether I still would say, hey, should we still go with the status of starting maybe in 10th grade to do some pre-prep and things like that. My thought on this is that, yes, let's say the SAT and the ACT will be diminished by many of the colleges as we're seeing in the trends right now. At the same time, though, UCs have announced plans that they're going to create a whole new standardized test of their own that they're going to implement. And my concern or my curiosity is how much of that is going to be any different from the SAT. So for example, if you start studying for the SAT anyways, which still are valued by summer programs, still are valued by some of the high schools or some of the colleges that you're going to apply to most likely, how much of that would still make sense in terms of just study for it anyways, because it'll help transfer over and add value in other aspects, whether it's the new standardized test that the UC provides or other private schools provide. So my kind of majority stance has been to continue as is, to still prepare for the SAT if you're aiming for the higher tier schools.
And since you guys have just mentioned about like the August test and things like that, so if you guys didn't know, College Board was providing priority to students who are juniors who are able to take, who need to take the SAT, who haven't had the chance to take it yet, or they signed up for the June test and, they weren't able to take the June exam. And so they gave them priority. So I believe that those slots are now taken. Students who are able to now sign up for the SAT, which opened June 3rd, they wanted, they might not be able to sign up for the August, September, or October exams because those are given priority to kind of the juniors that absolutely need it, or, soon to be seniors class of 2021 that absolutely need it. But I do agree with you, Jay and Richard. Like, I really do think that, preparing accordingly, I think at this point, College Board is trying to provide as many opportunities as possible. And at this point, test scores can only help you. Good test scores can only help you. So be mindful of that. But at the same time, if you have a list of 10 schools that you're applying to and none of them require the SAT, or they're making it optional or test blind, then, make your decisions accordingly based on that. But if you have a lower GPA, and you need test scores to kind of balance that out. Again, good test scores can only help you. So I would definitely recommend considering that with your testing. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the UC. So I know this was like probably one of the biggest news. And I'm sure at this point, once the Hall Pass podcast goes up, you guys are all going to know what it is that the UCs are doing already. But just so you guys know, the UCs have unanimously approved the suspension of standardized test requirements. So that means ACT and SAT for all freshmen until fall of 2024. They are working to create their own kind of test for them to get for students to take to try to get accepted. But that's not going to roll out until 2025. And in the case that they're not able to create this new test for class of 2025 students, then they're just going to, forego the testing and the standardized testing altogether. So basically, class of 2021 to class of 2022 is test optional. So basically what this means is that students have the option of submitting the test. They don't have to take the test in order to be considered for admission. However, campuses can still use the SAT and the ACT for admissions, like scholarships, post-enrollment course placement, statewide eligibility, so the EIC for admissions guarantee. So they can still use the testing for certain things, but it's not a requirement. Whereas in class of 2023 to 2024, so current 8th and 9th graders, they will be completely test blind, which means all California public and independent high school students have the option to submit the ACT, SAT, but those scores may not be used in the admissions decisions. Again, they're still going to be using it for scholarships, post-enrollment course placement, and statewide eligibility for admission guarantee, but they're not going to be using it for your admissions. So that's kind of the big news that's happening in the UCs. They are a really big public school system, probably the largest and the most well-known in the world. And so them taking a step and saying, hey, we're not going to go with the SAT and ACT anymore has been a really big kind of stance that they took. So what do you guys think about this, Richard and Jay? Like, how do you guys foresee maybe how this is going to look like for the future, or, what do you guys think overall about this?
I think the landscape of testing in terms of college admissions is definitely going to change within the next 10 years, especially if the UCs find it to be very successful, if it works really well without having to have tests as a primary component of the admissions process. If that ends up going really well, I would assume that a lot of colleges would start kind of following in their footsteps, especially since, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the UCs are like the College Board's number one, like they're the biggest customer. Like they're the ones who use the College Board the most. And I think, you're definitely going to see some changes to that in other schools too, within the next decade, probably.
Yeah.
So I have a kind of a broader macro thought about this, because College Board knew that their their days were kind of numbered, which is why they started adjusting and including like community values into their scores and things of that nature. But I think the COVID-19 situation just really accelerated that
Yeah.
declining curve. And
Yeah.
so when I'm looking at this, I maybe this is like the skeptic or the tinfoil hat kind of person in me. I hate that I might be doing that kind of thing here, but um, think about reducing and eliminating test scores. That's one more barrier that's out of the way for more applicants to just try and apply. And one of the ranking values that people look at in, you know, determining, let's say, the rank of a school is the popularity of the school, how many applicants apply to the school. And so now there's going to be this drive to essentially lower barriers, whether they're legitimate barriers and whether they're socioeconomically kind of biased or prejudiced or not is a totally different debate we can have. But nonetheless, we're dropping barriers and we're increasing more applicants. And so I'm looking at it from a student point of view, saying like, what are we going to apply to like 30, 40 schools now? Is that going to be the standard? Are we going to get waitlisted a majority of the time? Because nowadays we're getting more waitlisted than rejected, and they're kind of holding on to you, kind of like a holding on to the branch before they finally let go kind of thing. And so I think that when I'm looking at this scenario from a macro point of view, it's a question of how many universities are going to essentially remove barriers. Vincent, you mentioned how we won't know maybe for 10 years. I have a genuine question about that. When will we know quantitatively whether this is effective or not? And what is the effect that we're trying to have? Because if we want less barriers to get more people to apply so we can increase the numbers, then this is the way to do it. But is this the way to do it in terms of maintaining the scholastic integrity of the higher institutions where they're going to be more challenging and rigorous courses? Will more students be likely to drop off and drop out, putting more backward pressure and having even the classroom rigors inside the universities themselves kind of reducing standard as well? Again, that's kind of my thought. I'm very curious what will happen. In my opinion, I think that standardized test scores served a purpose. They served a role. It was imperfect, but nothing in life is that perfect. And I think it's going to create a huge problem and a dilemma for universities. I think it's going to be a balance.
Yeah, so I think that you're mentioning that it might dilute possibly the applicant pool in some ways, and then essentially that could create some sort of impact in like college, I guess, academics, and the way that it's impacting the academics as well. But I think that, you know, that to me, if I could just push back a little bit, that might be the reason why, you know, I wasn't a big proponent of standardized testing. I could see how they have, I get your academic integrity. I totally understand that. But at the same time, my thought is like, why should we judge students based on a standardized test score? And I'm not saying that's the only thing that, you know, college admissions, but now it's up to the college admissions to think about what creates and develops and what qualities and qualifications makes a successful student. And I think making people have that innovative, I don't know, step up your game admissions a little bit to start thinking about what other elements makes a successful human being and an applicant to your school beyond what standardized testing is truly what we should be pushing college admissions and higher education to start thinking about, to step beyond, right? And I'm excited for that. And I want to be a part of that change. And I want, you know, independent college counselors and high school counselors and people to work together to kind of develop the standards of what that looks like. Because I do think that there's awesome students out there that just really aren't great at standardized testing, and they're overlooked because of the SAT and ACT. So I'm not trying to hit College Board or ACT by any means, but I think this is a chance for us to change what college admissions looks like, and what academic rigor looks like, going from, you know, maybe testing to project-based schooling or project-based, you know, way to determine a student's academic progress. I don't know. That's
think about all the, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, think about all the SAT and ACT Hagwons too. Like their whole, like there's so many of those, they've like boomed over the past 20 years. I was going to
mention that. Because like, if you think about it, one of the culture types was to just send your kid to an academy after school for 48 hours or whatnot. And I think that was very conducive for the standardized type of, you know, barriers there. But when they're taking that away, you're going to have to rely a lot more on creativity and a lot more individualism and personal passion and, you know, drive. And that's not necessarily what's taught in the infrastructure that's already in place for a lot of what we deal with. We have a lot of Asian American communities that we help, and I think it's going to put more of a challenge on parents to be more proactive with their children.
I'm excited for that. I think I'm just excited for the trickle down effect. If college admissions starts changing and higher education starts changing, then I feel like that would trickle down to high schools and the way high schools change and so on and so forth. And I feel like this could be a really big step for the world of education. So I want to be positive in that way. For me, I think I can see the impact, but at the same time, I think that this is a great opportunity for us to redefine what education looks like for our country and our world. So anyways, I love those thoughts. So Jay, I know that we talked about this before, but you had just told us a little bit about how you've seen the pandemic impacted in like LAUSD, so the LA Unified School District, and then also kind of college graduates and COVID job search challenges. I know we have a lot of graduate students and even students who graduate from undergrad or in undergrad right now. They're just like, I don't know what to do over the summer. And, how have you seen kind of the impact? And do you have just a couple of quick updates for us for the LAUSD?
Sure. So the LAUSD, the superintendent came out onto a live stream and spent an hour or so kind of updating the public as to what the LA Unified School District is going to do come this fall. And so I'll start with the main bullet points for the new state school guidelines. There's going to be temperature checks for students entering campus each day. There are going to be more opportunities for hand washing. There are going to be fewer students in each class, with some students doing distance learning or part of the time or all of the time, depending on the class and how that's going to be structured. There's going to be a reduction in the number of students on school buses, and school meals, like lunchtime, the school meals may be served in class. And last bullet point, students who can't learn at home will be taught on campus. So we understand that, or they understand that, not everyone is going to have a stable internet connection. And so that's the challenge that they're trying to deal with. And the resulting overall kind of plan here is what they're considering to be a hybrid approach. So if things get worse and maybe there's a second outbreak and we have to cloister up, they're going to be prepared for that. They're going to adjust to do more stay home. If things turn out to be a little bit better, then they're going to be adapting to that scenario and opening up more of the on-campus opportunities. There's some interesting things, like ideas being thrown around that rather than the students in high schools going from class to class, the teachers will rotate so that they maintain a single sitting environment. So it minimizes the movement and potential spread of any disease. In addition to that, I think there's a lot of concern about who is going to be paying and overseeing the health checkups and how that's going to be managed, especially on top of the fact that their budget was cut. It tends to be the case. The teachers' budget's getting cut every year and year. So they're going to have to deal with a lot more with a little bit less. And I think that's going to put a lot of strain on teachers, and that's going to have students and parents having to be on their toes to adapt to whatever new regulations or new different practices they're going to implement this year. It's the wild, wild west. When it comes to jobs, we've been privileged enough to work with students over the past decade or so. And so some of our students have gone to college and graduated. Some of ours have recently graduated into today's job market, which is not looking the best. Couple of trend points. Previous to this year, students would typically, on average, apply to about 10 different job opportunities upon graduation from college. That number has risen double. Now it's around 20, and that becomes, that's the norm of what's expected. In addition to that, a lot of the employers are switching to different types of employment where they do a hybrid system, an online system, an on-site system, as well as even changing up kind of the social structure, the typical custom of a 5-day work week, instead doing it to a 4-day work week. There's a lot of research coming out that a 4-day work week increases and has a lot of benefit in terms of like productivity on top of the safety and well-being given the times. And so college students, we're still waiting for the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, to give out more data in terms of graduation differences and employment differences in terms of major choices. So I'd be more than happy to wait for that and update us in a future podcast. But right now, it seems like students are having to double their efforts to try to get jobs, and that it remains to be seen which major choices. Traditionally, we think that it's like the STEM majors are always going to be marketable, but with the change in practice, we have to wait for the data for that to really pan out. So I think maybe in the next month or two, we'll be able to get more information on what's happening with our college graduates.
Wow, that's really interesting. I feel like it's just influencing. We just focus on education, but really education is also so related to job markets and everything else that's happening in the future. So that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. Let's just go and do a really quick, like, round robin, just the three of us, really quickly on just examples of activities that high school students can do right now, moving away from updates and providing some advice, and just spend a couple of seconds here and there providing some updates, just so, because a lot of our students and parents are listeners, they're really curious about that. And I feel like every single episode and every time we're done with an episode, they're like, give us more. Can you give us more content? Give us more advice on what we can do. So I'll go ahead and get started, and then whoever, you or Jay or Richard or Jay, if you guys want to jump in, you can. So first and foremost, some examples of what I feel like high school students can do right now. I'm just going to focus on, in addition to the pandemic, the movement that's happening in our country and just the world right now with Black Lives Matter. And I feel like a lot of my students are actually getting very proactive and very passionate about what they could do with the Black Lives Matter movement. I have a Chinese American student who's currently working on a pamphlet on how to have proactive conversations with her parents in Chinese or in Mandarin about, Black Lives Matter and systemic racism and injustice. They're creating this pamphlet and giving it to all the Chinese American students at their high school and beyond, and connecting with people through social media to provide this as a resource in case there's any Chinese American student or just Chinese student who's like, I want to have this conversation with my parents, but I just don't know where to begin. So I feel like we've all been very clear about, with the Black Lives Matter movement, one of the things that you can do at the very minimum is to educate yourself and educate others. And you do that through conversation, right? You do that through having through having uncomfortable conversations and conversations that you wouldn't have had before. And by providing that opportunity and that outlet to have and educate each other and be educated and to listen to one another may help with further progressing in this country and providing progressive opportunities in this country. So or just the world in general. So that's just one example. So if you're not sure, Black Lives Matter movement, you're like, oh, I want to donate a ton of money, but I don't have a lot of money. And you see that a lot of people are already having fundraisers. One of the things that you can do is creating educational resources, provide educational resources for your peers, for your parents, for your parents' parents, for their children, so on and so forth, so that you're, educating one another and having these conversations. So that's just one activity that I feel like you can do as of right now with the things that are going on in our world today. Richard or Jay, what are some examples or just one example that you can share? Go ahead, Jay.
So
go ahead, Richard.
So on the note of on the note of education, one of the things that I've really been sharing with my students are online educational resources that everyone can take advantage of that are completely free and are all self-paced. And those would be things like edx.org and Coursera. There's a ton of courses on those websites that any student can get involved with, from like biotechnology to sociology, communications, journalism. There's so many different resources that students can take advantage of now. And since most of us are just kind of stuck at home and some of us don't really have the opportunity to go to a community college to take a class, for example, this is something that I've been recommending to quite a few of my students. And again, it's completely free. You can start it and finish it whenever you want. And at the end, you can also buy like a quick certificate so that you can maybe even put it on your resume and just show to colleges the courses that you were able to complete by the time that you apply.
So normally when I think of school activities or student activities related to their majors, I try to channel into two main categories. The first, and I'll give an example for each one. The first is going into research, academia, scholastics. And the second is an action-based, like a community impact. So in terms of research, I just want to note that we've been having more and more professors kind of realizing, okay, this is the scenario, this is the summer. And so they maybe 3 months ago did not respond well to cold calls of, hey, can I get an internship? Obviously, you don't type it that way. You'd have to introduce yourself and say it formally. But I've noticed that a lot of professors have started to be more open to remote work. So if you've cold called and tried to get an internship from a local professor near you last month or months before, and you didn't get a good result, don't fret. I think now is a good time to re-engage, do a second wave of approaches if you want to try to reach out and get a local internship. When it comes to an action project that I thought was really neat, I saw a student who got a bunch of butcher paper and created wooden posts and received permission from City Hall and posted like a big butcher paper message board right in front of the City Hall. And it literally just started with the titles, like things we want to change, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or discussions we want to have, and literally just left some markers along, just kind of on the
that's
side,
awesome.
so that people can walk by, and you start people writing like police reform, more training, and things of that nature. And
That's awesome.
I just thought that was really good for a media communications major.
Yeah,
It was so
super
subtle
unique.
and
Yeah.
it was very clean. It was very clean. And community impact. I think like what really stands out to me the most is students who look at this opportunity and say, whereas 99% of every other student say, I can't do this because of that, because of COVID-19, I've stayed at home. It's the 1% they'll go out and say, I know that maybe we can't, but I'm going to try this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about having that attitude. You got to start with having the attitude of what can I do?
Yeah, and community impact goes beyond just going into your community. I've had examples of students working on community impact projects like YouTube channels where one of my students is creating a channel where she's trying to educate parents on how to better teach their own students or their own kids, and that's something that you can do completely from home. It's a project that you can work on now, and it's something that is tangible and colleges can see. So I think, again, community impact can come in so many different ways, but that is, really interesting. It's a great way for students to spend their summers.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So for all of you out there, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on our podcast app and our website on thehallpasspodcast.com. But we're also going on YouTube, and there's a lot of resources for us on our YouTube channel. And you can just go to Admission Masters on YouTube to check out our YouTube channel. But we have certain channels under Admission Masters. So the Hall Pass podcast will be there in addition to AMTV, which we had just launched. So feel free to go ahead and go in there. And if you missed our episodes and you want to check us out live, or not live, but on video too, please feel free to go ahead and do that. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in on another one of our special episodes today. I hope this was helpful for all of you guys. We're going to try to do this monthly at minimum, so you guys can get some information, and you can always send us an email at thehallpasspodcast@gmail.com if you guys have any questions or topics that you want us to cover on the podcast. Until then, we will talk to you guys soon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.